Welcome to Take Off Your Shoes. My name is Reverend Marie Duquette. I'm an ordained minister in the Lutheran tradition, and I believe that where my story, your story, and God's story meet, there is holy ground. The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter. Then Jesus said to the disciples, "There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was squandering his property. So he summoned him and said to him, 'What is this that I hear about you? Give me an accounting of your management, because you cannot be my manager any longer.' Then the manager said to himself, 'What will I do now that my master is taking the position away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I have decided what to do so that when I am dismissed as manager, people may welcome me into their homes.' So summoning his master's debtors one by one, he asked the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' He answered, 100 jugs of olive oil. He said to him, 'Take your bill, sit down quickly, make it 50. Then he asked another, 'And how much do you owe?' He replied, 100 containers of wheat. He said to him, 'Take your bill and make it 80. And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into the eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest also in much. If then you have not been faithful with the dishonest wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? And if you have not been faithful with what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth." This is the gospel of the Lord. Please be seated. Today's gospel is about unexpected news that changed the life of every character in the story. The character, known as dishonest manager, likely did not expect his master to fire him for incompetence. The clients of this manager likely did not expect to have their debts reduced dramatically. The master likely did not expect the dishonest manager to devise a way forward after being fired, nor to have that way be one that furthered relationships with his debtors. You see, the reason that the master commends the dishonest manager for discounting his client's debts is this: the dishonest manager showed that he was not just a lazy employee, but also resourceful and motivated and shrewd. He was capable of expanding the master's impression of him in a provocative way while he was on the way out the door. Also, discounting his client's debts no doubt created favor between the newly unemployed in this story, but it also reflected well on the manager and made sure the client's new lower debt stayed in place. The master is now being viewed by his clients as unexpectedly generous, magnanimous. If the master returns their debts to the previous amounts, he risks losing that favor and the goodwill that has been created. It's a win-win-win, kinda. This odd story in which the redemption makes us uncomfortable can be helpful for us in this very moment as followers of Jesus and as citizens of this country and stewards of this world which God has entrusted to our care. One news story dominated the news cycle this past week. Those in power made sure it was covered continuously and from every angle. That coverage limited our access to other news that is important for us to know in our efforts to care for one another, as we are called to do. Listen, and just notice how many of these news stories during the past week did you hear? Every Republican in the Senate voted against releasing the Epstein files. For now, the full contents remain hidden. In a global first, Gen Z overthrew the government of Nepal, a country of 30 million people. Protesters burned parliament to the ground. Political leaders had to be evacuated from the capital on ropes by helicopter. The next day, they voted to elect the country's first woman prime minister to take over. The United Nations voted 142 to 10 to recognize the state of Palestine. It came as tanks entered Gaza City for the first time. Tanks. Internet access was completely cut off, an entire city and people now in the dark, leaving the people there less informed and less connected to the outside world. The largest civilian maritime mission flotilla is making their way to Gaza with humanitarian aid. Not one Western media outlet is following the flotilla. Polish, German, and Dutch fighter jets scrambled to intercept Russian drones. 19 drones made up the largest invasion of NATO airspace in years. Former President Bolsonaro, a friend of our current president, was jailed for 27 years. He was found guilty of trying to overthrow an election result and stay in power. A group of Americans are marching 166 miles from Philadelphia to the steps of the Capitol. They are delivering a copy of the U.S. Constitution to highlight the alarming loss of civil liberties we are witnessing. Our access to news in our country and in the world is being censored in ways that mislead us and pit us against one another. It makes one wonder who benefits from fanning the flame of this carefully orchestrated division and unrest. How do we act shrewdly at a time when deception and dishonesty is running rampant? Historians such as Heather Cox Richardson are waving red flags on every corner, the same red flags that ushered in world wars and genocides and trauma that continues to haunt people today. News correspondents, teachers, and artists are sounding the alarm, and that alarm is getting fainter by the day because those same voices are being silenced by those in power. It is hard for me to preach to you this morning, obviously. I want to comfort you in every place, all the time. I want to enable you to step into this sanctuary and check your worldly concerns at the door. I want the blessed assurance that because the news of now has happened before, surely we will all come through it again. But that is not a perspective or a privilege we can afford. Doing nothing. Resting in a lack of awareness. Not facing the truth about the perils we are facing. Moving forward with business as usual ensures that more people will suffer and die and that evil will find a more secure foothold in every city throughout this country. Today's gospel tells us that there is nothing commendable about avoiding the truth. Possibly the best thing that the dishonest manager did in today's gospel was to face the truth about himself. He says, "What shall I do? I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg." Honesty with himself An awareness of the danger of being unemployed saved him. His road to redemption began with him admitting what he would not or could not do, and then deciding what he could do. His response to the bad news of being fired is a response we each would do well to consider right now. As he modeled, first, we must listen to the news, especially news that we do not want to hear. The dishonest manager had to listen to his manager dismissing him before he realized he needed to take action. Willie Nelson, who some, including myself, consider a national treasure, modeled the way being shrewd can lead to a new path that is more life-giving, not just for ourselves, but to communities beyond what we could ever imagine. In 1990, Nelson's assets were seized by the IRS, which claimed that he owed $32 million. The difficulty of paying his outstanding debt was aggravated by weak investments he had made during the 1980s. In 1992, 2 years after his assets were seized, Nelson released the IRS tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories? The profits of the double album, destined to the IRS, and the auction of Nelson's assets, purchased by many of his supporters, cleared his debt. Yesterday, the annual Farm Aid Festival celebrated its 40th year. Farm Aid is an annual charity music festival created in 1985 to assist American farmers. Founded by Willie Nelson, Neil Young, and John Mellencamp, it raises funds to support a sustainable family farm system, address climate change, and combat social injustice. The Farm Aid Festival has raised almost $80 million, and it features diverse musical artists and board members, Dave Matthews, Margot Price. In 2023, Farm Aid distributed over $1.3 million in grants, with an emphasis on farmer-led climate solutions and racial equity in agriculture. Farm Aid also runs a disaster fund for farmers affected by natural disasters. As we become more informed and see the danger of inaction, we can take the next step and decide what we can do. The dishonest manager decided to make friends with his soon-to-be former clients by reducing their debt load. Regardless of his motive or the morality of his actions, he did, quite literally, lessen the load of people he knew, people in his circle, people in his community, and the master commended him, calling him shrewd. That is having good judgment, being astute. He may have been apathetic and uninvolved in his job in the past, but now he's taking action and making connections in ways that are helpful to himself and to those he serves. The gospel ends with a harsh warning about priorities. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. But this is a parable about much more than the stewardship of money. This is a story that reminds us that following Jesus, living the gospel, is never about safety. It is about doing what is right to love your neighbor, even if it's scary or inconvenient or dangerous to do so. You cannot serve God and wealth just as you cannot serve apathy and action. You cannot serve revenge and redemption. You cannot serve distraction and dedication. You cannot look at your neighbor when you are looking the other way. The prophet Amos reminds us today, "Hear this, you who trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land. God will not tolerate your abuse." We want the comforting gospel for good reason. It takes courage to do the right thing when the risk of doing so can have dangerous consequences. And if the gospel is good news, it must be good news for all people. It must be good news for those on the receiving end of violence by the state. It must be good news for family farmers who are suffering because of the toll that corporate farming is taking on their lives. It must be good news for those being arrested, detained, and deported without due process. It must be good news for comedians who point out absurdities about current events and those in power. It must be good news for those working for and with Johnson Park Center, the largest supplier of food to the poor in Utica, whose work is being compromised by funding cuts. The good news in today's gospel is that when we look in the mirror and assess what we cannot do and what we can do, God tempers our despair and calls on our shrewdness, our ability to see a path forward and find our role in clearing it. Another piece of news you may not have heard happened right here yesterday. Mohawk Valley Gives, as you know, is a program that engages nonprofits, businesses, community residents, and fund holders to harness the community's collective energy for the greatest possible impact. The event raised over $6.4 million yesterday to support those serving the unhoused, the poor, the disabled, all those who suffer from poverty and injustice. Organizations we support, places that you work, were recipients of that generosity. This is not a time for hedging our bets and taking the comfortable or safe path. This is a time for courage that will no doubt challenge each of us. But our courage also brings with it good news. As we step up to the challenge of now, we will do so with a God who will not leave us, a God who is not interested in golden monuments of stone, but in sacrificial love of neighbor, a God who urges us forward, saying, "Pick up your cross and follow me. Lift up and protect the poor and needy. Comfort the frightened. Accompany the lonely. Be of good courage. I am with you."